Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing something a little different. I'm going to try and hopefully start a new quote-unquote video series. Just basically, new set comes out, I pick my favorite cards from it. I mainly play Commander, so that's what we're going to focus on. If you enjoy the video, let me know. Thanks. We'll get into the list right now. Okay, in no particular order. I'm just going to go off the cuff here. So the first card I picked is Starfall, Invocation. I know a lot of people actually like this card quite a bit. I am one of them. It's 5 mana, 3 and 2 white. Sorcery, gift a card. Destroy all creatures. If the gift was promised, you return a creature card put into your graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. If you gift a card, you have to... If you gift a card, they draw a card before its other effects. However, I think the rules say that if they accept the gift, like as soon as the gift is accepted, they can't like answer the actual spell. Like I think gifting a card is the resolving of the spell, so they can't gift a card then counterspell the spell. And once they get the card, it's already it's good to go. I'm pretty sure that's how the rules work. But anyway, it is a 5-mana day judgment, obviously with some upside. I mean, white has a bajillion of these effects. I think there's 60. I'm pretty sure, if not probably even more. Honestly, if you count the other combination of colors. But yeah, white has a lot of, destroy all creatures stuff. I think this is one of the first ones that actually lets you bring something back on the same card. Like this card's brought back and face reward. But that's another card from your hand. I don't know, this card seems really good if you want to wipe the board and keep your one piece you really need. Kind of reminds me of the Eternal Wanderer, there we go, from Phyrexia. The minus ability where it's each person keeps one creature. A little bit better. It's 5 mana versus the 6 for the Planeswalker, but again, it keeps it around. But obviously pros and cons, but I feel like this card is going to be really good and played in quite a bit of decks. I mean, for the most part, I think you'd rather have this over, Damning Verdict, and I probably played over Day of Judgment as well. You played over Depopulate for certain, you know what I mean? There's a lot of cards you would play it over, and that's pretty awesome. There's a lot of cards that is a little bit better than, so I think that's going to be really cool. And also being able to save your creature is going to be huge. So that's why it's on the list. So next up on my list here, I have Peerless Recycling. This effect isn't too crazy. It's 1 mana and a green, so 2 mana total for an instant. It says gift a card. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If the gift was promised, instead return 2 target permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. We've seen this before with, more recently, Unnatural Restoration, target permanent, but you get to proliferate. Also with Revive the Shire, which is the same thing, but you can create a food token instead. I think this is the only one that lets you do it twice, because if you promise the gift. The only problem with this card is the fact that it only hits permanents. Granted, that's not a huge deal. If you're in a green deck, you're going to be mostly playing permanents. Mostly, big green stompy stuff. But, cards like... Eternal Witness is target card, so, you get to, same with, Timeless Witness, it's target card, so, again, a little bit of flexibility, same with Regrowth, but again, that's any card, but, I think the fact that you can do 2 cards with Peerless Recycling is actually going to put it over the edge quite a bit. Someone blows up your, granted, you're in green, I'm not using too much ramp, someone blows up your Mana Dork and, say you're Dry the Illusion Grove, maybe a 2-color deck. 2 mana, give someone a card, bolt back into your hand. That's pretty good, and you're in green, you can recast this stuff pretty easily. Or, say someone destroys your, the Great Henge, so to speak. There's so many opportunities. Like I said, it hits permanents, which is, not as good as any card in your graveyard, but I think this card's going to do really well. Plus, it's also instant speed, so, there's a lot of shenanigans you can pull with this. Regrowth is sorcery. Revive the Shire sorcery as well. I think a Natural Restoration, is also a sorcery speed. So I think the instant speed really makes this card a lot better than the other ones. So we'll see if it's good, but I like this one a lot. Alright, next on my list here, it's kind of boring because it's, it's very similar to the white card, right? It's Feed the Cycle. 1 generic, 1 black, instant, as an additional cost to cast a spell, forage, or pay a black. And to forage, you exile 3 cards from your graveyard, or sacrifice a food. And if you do those, or you don't pay that, destroy target creature or planeswalker. So, at best, it's It's a 2 mana, or excuse me, at worst, it's a 3 mana, destroy target creature, planeswalker, like Hero's Down. It's basically a Hero's Downfall, right? At its worst. I don't know. At its best, I feel like 2 mana forage, either sacrifice a food or mill or exile 3 cards from your graveyard. I feel like that's a pretty easy task. So essentially, this is it's in the same vein as like Bitter Triumph, right, or Infernal Grasp. In my opinion, again, it does technically require a little more setup. You need to either be in food or need to mill. So it's not as good as those two, right? But I still think this card's pretty good, and it'll slot right in pretty easily to the black suite of removal that already exists. But I feel like it's a slightly better than, like the Bone Shards or the Annihilating Glares of the world. Plus, it's instant speed too, so it definitely helps it. But I do feel like foraging is such a little cost; it really is not that big a deal. Mostly the exiling 3 cards from your graveyard, not so much sacrificing a food, but who knows? I mean, with Eldraine a few sets ago, now this set with a bunch of food and stuff for tokens running around, probably be a lot easier than it would have been before. So I don't know. I feel like this card's going to be pretty, what's the word? Ubiquitous, like top 3, top 4 removal in terms of like next to the other ones that are already like super good. I know it's kind of a basic and generic pick, but I just think it's going to be a really good removal spell that's going to see a lot of play. So next up, I have a card that I think is kind of nuts. Artist's Talent. It's 1 and a red. It's an enchantment class like we had in the D&D set. As soon as you cast it, it's 2 mana. This is the first ability. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card, which I think is just nuts. But there's leveling up. At level 2, which costs 2 generic and a red, non-creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and that's any non-creature, so artifacts, instant sorceries, enchantments, everything. Plus, you also get the ability of the first top part as well, so now it has 2 abilities. Third ability, another 2 and a red, level 3. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. That's not, honestly, if you're running it for that effect, you're probably better off running the other bajillion doublers or triplers that there already is. I mean, if you run this card, you're pretty much running it for the first effect, maybe the second effect. Because 2 mana, looting every time you cast a spell. Is it looting? Oh god, rummaging, looting, whatever it ends up being. I forget what the actual order is. It's just kind of nuts. 2 mana, I play my mana rock. I don't like these cards. I'm gonna dig, or I'm gonna cast a burn spell. I'm gonna dig. I don't know. I think this card just kind of pops off like crazy. Plus, if you have draw card synergies as well too, I don't know. I think this card's gonna be pretty nuts, especially in Azorius stuff. Not Azorius. Izzet stuff. Excuse me. Oh boy, that's a different color combination altogether. Izzet stuff. I think this card can just be nuts. And it's crazy too because I think the only other card that's very similar to it would be the recently printed Ashland Flame Dancer from Modern Horizons 3. It has a very similar, but not quite the same. It has Magecraft when you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, discard, then draw. I don't know. I feel like this Artist Talent is going to be kind of insane. Again, I don't know if I'm at the best to evaluating cards, but I don't know. The effect seems very, very strong. It triggers on all non-creature spells. It just seems insane to me. Red loves artifacts. Every time you cast an artifact, Duretti would love this. I'm going to pitch this artifact. Chisgoria, I think, is going to love this card, too. Probably going to put it in my Chisgoria deck. Yeah, this card's nuts. Alright, next on the list, this is actually making a reappearance here. We have Coiling Rebirth. It's 3 mana, 2 and 2 black for 5 mana total. Sorcery. Gift a card. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then, if the gift was promised and that creature isn't legendary, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a 1/1. Yeah, 5 mana, 2 of the same thing back, as long as it's not legendary, seems pretty good. 5 mana is generally on rate, for single target stuff, Bond of Revival, it's 5 mana, target creature gets haste. Most recently we have Defossilize from Ixalan, the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Return target creature, but it gets explores and explores again, so explores twice. So, you know, a little bit bigger of a creature, but it's still the one creature coming back. I mean, there are cheaper versions of it. Like, you have cards like No One Left Behind from Brothers War. It's 5 mana, it costs 3 less to cast if targets a creature with mana value 3 or less, but still 5 mana, you know, for the one. That's actually a pretty good one as well. I like that one quite a bit. Like cards like Dread Return, which is, I mean, I think probably one of the more played ones. That like for single target stuff. You can return something back, but you can also sacrifice 3 creatures to flash it back. But it's also 4 mana just to cast naturally. So I don't know. I think, you know, you have like the mini small ones who, like I said, like can bring back small stuff like Call the Death Dweller. You know, total CMC of 3 or less from your graveyard. But I don't know. I feel like getting a double of something is probably going to be more substantial. Like, you know, oh no, getting 2 Gary triggers, or Grey Merchant of Ashadil, for those unaware. You know, at the same time, or like, you know, Cavalier of Night, you know, ETB, sack a creature, destroy something, or there's just a lot of really good ETB stuff. I mean, even, you know, if you just want to ramp, get 2 Solemn Simulacrums if you really wanted to. But I feel like just having 2 of one of your better creatures, unfortunately, if it's legendary, then it doesn't work as well, but I feel like for the most part, there's a lot of utility creatures that need to come back, like, you know, Plaguecrafter. You know, everyone's zacking 2 creatures. It's just a good way to wipe the board. It's just a very usable card. Next up, we have another returning card from the top 10 art list. This one's Dawn's Truce. Again, a lot of people probably really like this card a lot. It's 1 generic, 1 white for 2 mana total, instant speed, gift a card. If you and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. If the gift was promised, permanents you control also gain indestructible until end of turn. So this is basically the white's version of Heroic Intervention with 1 extra step of having to let your opponent draw a card. I feel like that's insane. It also targets you, which is kind of, you know, niche, but it could be useful. I think the closest this card comes to would be Surge of Salvation from March of the Machine, I believe. Surge of Salvation is 1 white total for an instant. You and permanents you control gain hexproof in a turn. Prevent all damage to black and red sources would deal to you, but that's whatever. But, you know, for 1 mana, you and permanents you control gain hexproof in a turn. Which, you know, not bad, right? 1 mana, protect your... It's basically a protection spell for a 1 turn, which isn't terrible. But I feel like, again, Heroic Intervention is played because it's very good. So I think the white version of this, Dawn's Truce, is going to also be very good. Yeah, you have to give someone a card, but I mean, I'd rather let the person who's behind the most draw a card to save my stuff, you know what I mean? It's very similar also to Flare of Fortitude, which came out in Modern Horizons 3. That one's 4 mana, instant, but you can sacrifice a non-token white creature instead to do it for free. Until end of turn, your life total can't change, and permanent you control gain hexproof indestructible. It's just another effect of that. But I feel like they're very similar, right? Because Flare you can cast for free. Sack a creature, of course, but it has to be non-token, so I feel like in some decks it's better than Dawn's Truce, don't get me wrong. I mean, Aristocrats, Flare is probably better. But I think if you're not in an Aristocrats token-style deck, I think Dawn's Truce is probably better overall. But yeah, it's just a very good card from the set. Like, I'm not going to complain that there's more of these effects for white, because I love white. White's probably my favorite color to play in Commander, so yeah, it's a very good card. I recommend it. Alright, next up we have a card called Lunar Convocation, again returning as well. That's 1 white and 1 black for an enchantment. It reads, at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained and lost life this turn, create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying, and it has the activated ability, 1 generic, 1 black, pay 2 life to draw a card. So yeah, this card's doing a lot, right? If you gain life, each opponent loses a life. And then if you lost and gained, you're making tokens, which, again, in Orzhov, that's incredibly easy to do. Plus, if you need to lose life, like say you gain life but no one's attacking you and you lose life, boom, 2 mana, you get a card out of it, and you also get to trigger the other effects. Like, I don't know, this card seems really good for 2 mana. It's going to slot in a lot of those decks pretty good, I think. It has, the 2 mana, pay 2 life is basically what, Greed? Or I think one of the Ereboses is very similar to. But yeah, this card is just, it's just a lot of good stuff. It's not even like, I don't think it's like incredibly like broken. It's just going to just fit in so many good decks. I don't know. This card just seems very, very good. Like, obviously, it's going to be a good card, but I think especially like it's a token maker, it's a card draw engine, it's a life, makes people lose life, all for 2 mana. That's crazy. And up next, we have another red card, Spine Lynx. 2 generic, a red and a red for 4 mana total. Creature, elemental cat, so fits in those cat life gain decks. Life gain, I don't know. A 5/4. Players can't gain life. Period. Damage cannot be prevented. Period. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. Period. This card seems very, very strong, as all these cards do. I mean, they're not getting life. I think it's more dependent on your meta, right? In my LGS meta, life gain really isn't that big of a deal. If anything, I play the life gain decks because I'm usually in some form of white. That's not a huge deal in most metas, I think. Life gain. Damage can't be prevented is also very interesting. I don't know. Like, this is what? Questing Beast in green that does that as well. If you're running fogs, and then obviously it's going to suck, right? Because damage can't be prevented. But I feel like, although I do feel like the EDH just in general is kind of leaning more towards fogs these days. At least, according to the other internet peoples, but again, take that with a grain of salt. I feel like, plus like a built-in price of progress on this card is going to be pretty good, which, deals damage based on the non-basics. But I feel like this can be paired pretty good with other cards. But I think overall, it's got all the stuff you want it right now. Can't gain life. Damage can't be prevented. Deal damage for 4 mana. And, I mean, people are greedy these days with their mana bases. I mean, even I am too. Like, I have decks that have, like, maybe 6 basics in there. So this thing would wreck me, right? But yeah, I think this card, for 4 mana, pretty good body too, 5/4. Just all the effects it has on it are just really, really good. Alright, rounding up some of the end cards here, we have Jackdaw Savior. It's 2 generic and a white for 3 mana total. It's a creature, bird, cleric. It's a 3/1. It has flying. Whenever Jackdaw Savior or another creature you control with flying dies, return another target creature card with lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield. This card seems very, very good, especially if you're in like a deck with a lot of flyers. I know it's going to go really well in my Angel Tribal deck. It pairs really well with like flying counters as well. Luminous Broodmoth, something dies, it comes back with a flying counter on it. Then it'll die again. If, it dies again, Jackdaw Savior, see, hey, it has flying. It'll bring something else back. So I think that it's going to be a very, very good card in a lot of, like, the flying decks. Obviously, it has to have flying for it to bring back. Or, I mean, even if Jackdaw dies, you can still at least bring something back for, 2 mana. Which, who knows, right? Ambitious Farmhand, get another planes to your hand. Or, maybe your Serra Ascendant died really early on, and, 1 mana, Serra Ascendant's back on the battlefield. I think this card just has a lot of utility with it. So I think it's going to be a very, very good card in a lot of decks that have a lot of flyers. Alright, and last but not least, I think we have probably one of my favorites just because, one, it's a frog, and frogs are cool. But it's also a card that can just win you the game, meeting the requirements. It is 20-toed Toad, 3 generic and a blue for 4 mana total, creature, frog, wizard, and it's a 3/3. Alright. Your maximum hand size is 20. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on 20-toed Toad and draw a card. Whenever 20-toed Toad attacks, you win the game if there are 20 or more counters on it, or you have 20 or more cards in hand. This is very... I mean, the first card I think of would be Simic Ascendancy, right? It's 20 counters. The Simic Ascendancy, I think, is upkeep. This is attacking. So, a little different. Very similar, but again, haste is a thing. Whatever. There's obviously ways to work around it. Also reminds me a lot of Helix Pinnacle with a bunch of counters on it. You win the game, kind of a thing. Yeah, this card seems stupidly fun. I will say, I feel like the 20 cards in hand might be easier than the 20 counters on it. Because, again, as everything, one removal spell, you're done. But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like this card just seems incredibly fun. What can I say? Like, who doesn't want to have 20 cards in their hand and win with a toad that swings a, hey, I get 20 cards in my hand and my frog is attacked, I win the game. Like, power level, maybe not the strongest in the world, but this seems like one of the more fun cards, and again, it goes in a frog deck, it goes in a wizard deck, so all you Inala players can have a frog wizard if you really wanted to. But this card just seems really fun to play, and I think it would actually probably fit pretty good in a, you win the game style kind of deck. I mean, even like Triskaideka File, where if you have 13 cards in your hand, you win the game, kind of stuff like that. Or even Jace or Labman might fit pretty well in the deck. Like that kind of style of deck. Because, you gotta have all your cards in your hand kind of a thing. I don't know, I just feel like this is a very funny deck. Or, funny card. That might see a decent amount of play in certain decks. I don't know. But, yeah, the card looks fun, and I can't wait to try it out. Okay, there you have it. I think I picked, 10 cards or so. There's a lot of cool cards in this set, right? I just picked, 10 that really I think I'm going to play with the most likely. Obviously, lands and stuff excluded. 3 Tree City is going to be nuts in any tribal deck. That kind of stuff I'm not going to include because it's mostly stuff people have been talking about. These are kind of cards that a few of them are kind of out of nowhere, kind of a style card. But yeah, thanks for checking out the video. I'll probably try and do this for sets as they come out. I might go back and do some for old sets, but who knows. But yeah, let me know what you think and catch you guys later.